The wind that night didn't howl, it mourned. It swept over the empty plains of Pine Hollow, carrying the sound of loneliness through every brittle stalk of grass, through every shutter that rattled against a house that hadn't known laughter in 3 years. Up on the ridge stood the Cole Ranch, once a proud stretch of land, now a ghost of what it used to be. The fences leaned, the barn sagged, and its owner, Wyatt Cole, was known in town by a name no man envied. The Ghost Rancher. He'd earned it fair. 3 winters ago, fever took his wife Mary and the unborn child she'd carried. Wyatt buried them both on the hill overlooking the cottonwoods and hadn't spoken more than a few sentences at a time since. He worked his land alone, kept the world out, and told himself he preferred it that way. The townsfolk tried once, offered help. Warm meals, a place at church pews, but Wyatt had turned them away with that silent, hollow stare. After a while, they stopped trying. That night, the storm came suddenly. Cold rain turning to sleet, sleet to snow. The kind of storm that could turn a trail invisible in minutes. Wyatt was out in it anyway, pulling a tarp over the feed wagon, muttering under his breath about bad timing and worse luck. He was just about to shut the barn doors when his lantern flickered. Caught something. A movement quick and small in the far corner of the hayloft. His hand went to his revolver instinctively. Coyotes sometimes wandered too close, but the sound that came next wasn't a growl, it was a sob. Wyatt froze. The sound was soft, broken, like someone trying hard not to be heard. He climbed the ladder slowly, lantern in one hand, gun in the other. The light reached the corner, revealing a small figure bundled beneath a torn blanket. Straw clung to her tangled hair. Big blue eyes blinked at the sudden light. A little girl, no older than 6. She clutched something in her tiny fist, a broken silver locket, and stared at him as though she'd seen a ghost. Wyatt lowered the gun, his voice rough from disuse. "Who are you, kid?" No answer. Just a trembling breath. He tried again, softer this time. "You lost?" Her lips quivered. "Waiting for Mama." Wyatt swallowed hard. There was something about that, something that cut deeper than the cold outside. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, your mama ain't out there tonight." Not in this storm. The girl didn't move. Her face was pale, cheeks raw from windburn. Wyatt sighed and muttered, "Fine. You can stay till it blows over." He set down the lantern and fetched a blanket from the tack room. She didn't thank him. Didn't even look up. Just curled tighter under the hay like a frightened kitten. By morning, the snow had piled halfway up the barn doors. Wyatt stepped out into the pale gray dawn, breath steaming, and found the world buried in silence. The ranch looked like it was holding its breath. He made coffee, stared at the cup, and wondered why a child had been out here alone. But he didn't ask because asking meant caring, and caring led back to the hill behind the cottonwoods. Still, when he checked the barn again, he found her shivering. "Storm's not done yet," he said gruffly. "You'll catch your death sitting there." She looked up, eyes glassy with sleep. "It's cold." Wyatt hesitated, then scooped her up, awkwardly like a man handling something too fragile for his calloused hands, and carried her into the cabin. He set her by the fire, gave her a mug of warm milk, and stood back like he'd just broken one of his own rules. After a few sips, the girl whispered, "Thank you, mister." He grunted. "Name's Wyatt." She nodded faintly, tracing the locket in her hand. "What's that?" he asked, gesturing toward it. "It's Mama's," she said. "It broke when the wagon fell." Wyatt frowned. "What wagon?" "The one we were in. Outside town. Mama said we'd be safe." Her voice cracked on the word. Wyatt felt the weight of those words settle over him. He set his jaw, stepped outside, and stared into the white horizon. Somewhere out there was a wreck, and a dead woman, and a child who had nowhere to go, and though he didn't know it yet, the moment he found that little girl in his barn was the moment the ghost rancher's heart began to thaw. The storm raged for 2 more days, thick snow swallowing every fence post and wagon trail in sight. Wyatt shoveled a path to the barn twice, mostly to give himself something to do that didn't involve sitting too close to the fire, or to the girl. She barely spoke, just watched him with those wide, steady eyes, clutching the broken locket like it was her only anchor in the world. He tried to ignore her, tried to pretend she was just a responsibility blown in with the snow. But even silence has a weight, and hers filled the cabin like a ghost he couldn't shut out. When he brought her a plate of stew that second night, she pushed the spoon around but didn't eat. "You've got to eat, kid," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Mama's coming." Wyatt's throat tightened. He leaned on the table, forcing his voice to stay calm. "You said your wagon fell. Where?" She looked at him like she was trying to remember. "Outside town, near the creek." Mama said, "Hold on," then everything went loud. Her small fingers curled around the locket. She said not to be scared. Wyatt stared into the fire, jaw tight. He'd seen that kind of look before, on faces in war, on folks who'd lost more than their hearts could carry. He stood up abruptly. "Finish your stew," he muttered, grabbing his coat. By dawn, he was on horseback, heading toward Pine Hollow through half-frozen drifts. On the town sat quiet under a blanket of snow, smoke rising from chimneys, the church bell half buried in white. Wyatt tied his horse outside the marshal's office and stepped in, boots heavy with slush. Marshal Tate looked up from his desk. "Wyatt Cole," he said, sounding surprised. "Didn't think I'd see you this side of spring." Wyatt didn't waste time. "Found a little girl hiding in my barn. Says her wagon went off the road." The marshal frowned, straightening. "That so?" He opened a ledger. "You just might have found the child we were looking for. Wagon wrecked out near Dry Creek. Stage driver found the mother. Poor woman didn't make it." Wyatt's stomach sank. "Any family?" he asked. Tate shook his head. "We put out word, but no kin turned up. Orphanage wagon's coming through in a few days. We figured she'd go east." Wyatt hesitated. She's awfully young. Maybe she shouldn't be shipped off just yet." The marshal gave him a long, careful look. "You offering to keep her?" Wyatt's jaw flexed. "Just till the snow clears," Tate shrugged. "Suit yourself. But you'll need to bring her in when the matron comes through. Name's Sophie, by the way. We found that much in the rec records." "Sophie," Wyatt repeated under his breath. The name felt strange in his mouth, alive somehow. When he got back, Sophie was standing at the window, her little hand pressed against the frosted glass. "Town's not far," he said, stomping snow off his boots. "They'll take care of you soon." She turned, face falling. "You don't want me here?" Wyatt's chest ached in a way he didn't expect. "It's not about wanting. It's what's right." But Mama said, "Good men don't send folks away." The words hit him harder than they should have. He looked away, busying himself with the firewood. "Your mama sounds like she had more faith in men than she ought to." That night when the wind rose again, he found her curled by the hearth, blankets slipping off her shoulders. She was asleep, soft snores mixing with the crackle of the fire. He could have moved her, should have, but instead Wyatt found himself sitting in the chair nearby, just watching the slow rise and fall of her breathing. He remembered another winter, another small quiet sound filling his cabin. Mary's humming. The unborn child was kicking beneath her hand. The warmth that used to mean home. Wyatt shut his eyes. "Don't go Karen, Cole," he whispered to himself. "Don't you dare start." But when he woke at dawn, he found Sophie had shuffled closer in the night, blanket half covering his boots, and something in his chest had already begun to crack. By the time the snow began to melt, word of the wagon wreck had reached every porch in Pine Hollow. Folks whispered about the little survivor staying up at Cole Ranch, the same rancher who hadn't taken company since the day they buried Mary Cole on the ridge. The marshal rode out himself one morning, coat flapping in the wind. Wyatt was in the corral mending a post when he saw the badge glinting in the sun. Tate dismounted, voice easy but firm. "Morning, Wyatt. How's the girl?" She's alive, Wyatt replied flatly. Eats like a bird. Talks even less, the marshal nodded. Well, the orphanage wagon's due in 2 days. Matron's coming to fetch her. Wyatt's hammer froze mid-swing. She's what? Orders came through from Carson County, Tate said. They've got room out east. She'll be looked after properly. Wyatt stared at the snow melting into the dirt, jaw set. She's barely stopped shaking in her sleep. You really think she's ready to be hauled halfway across the country? Tate sighed. Ain't my call, Wyatt. She's got no kin here. You've done your part, but rules are rules. When the marshal left, Wyatt leaned against the fence rail, trying to shake off the unease curling in his gut. He told himself it wasn't his business, never had been. But when he looked toward the cabin and saw Sophie sitting on the porch, braiding the mane of his old mare Daisy, something in him twisted. That evening, he found her in the barn again, whispering to the horse. Daisy likes you, Wyatt muttered, pretending to be busy stacking feed. Sophie grinned shyly. She's got kind eyes. Don't go sweet-talking her too much. She's spoiled enough. Sophie giggled, a light, quick sound that startled him. He hadn't heard laughter in that barn since Mary. It hit him like sunlight through storm clouds, warm and unfamiliar. After a while, Sophie looked up from her braids. Why do folks call you the ghost man? Wyatt stiffened. Who told you that? The store lady. Said you don't talk to anybody, he grunted. She ought to mind her own business, Sophie hesitated. Were you sad before I came? Wyatt swallowed hard. Still am some days. She nodded solemnly, as if understanding more than her years allowed. Mama used to say sadness doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you loved somebody. He stared at her, words caught behind his teeth. Then, with a gruff exhale, he changed the subject. Time for bed, kid. But long after she'd gone inside, her words stayed with him, rattling around the empty corners of his heart. And the next morning, the orphanage wagon came into view. A tall, stern woman stepped down, skirts brushing the mud. Mr. Cole, she said briskly, I'm here for the child. Sophie stood behind Wyatt, small hands gripping his coat. Her eyes were wide, terrified. Wyatt looked down at her, then back at the woman. Seems to me she's still got some healing to do. I'm sure she'll heal faster with proper guardians, the matron replied. Sophie tugged his sleeve. Please, Mr. Wyatt, don't let them take me. He felt something break clean through his chest. The image of Mary's grave flashed behind his eyes. The cold soil, the silence afterward. I'll keep her, he said suddenly. The matron blinked. Pardon? Just till she's ready. You can tell the marshal yourself. The woman frowned, but Wyatt's tone left no room for argument. She turned on her heel, muttering about stubborn men and backcountry sentimentality. When the wagon disappeared down the road, Sophie threw her arms around his waist. Thank you, Mr. Wyatt. He froze, unsure what to do with her warmth against his coat. Don't go thanking me, he muttered. You're just staying till you're strong enough. But Sophie didn't seem to hear. She was already talking about naming his horses, calling one Buttercup, another Stormfoot. Wyatt shook his head, but a ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That night, for the first time in 3 years, the ranch didn't feel like a tomb. The lamps glowed warmer. The silence wasn't so heavy. And though Wyatt Cole would never have admitted it, he found himself checking the locks twice before bed, not out of habit, but out of something far more dangerous, care. The spring thaw came slowly that year, like the land itself was trying to remember what warmth felt like. Snow melted off the fence rails, the creek began to murmur again, and color crept back into the hills surrounding Cole Ranch. So did life. Sophie followed Wyatt everywhere now, into the barn, out to the fields, even up the hill where Mary was buried. She'd chatter about the clouds, the cows, or some story she half remembered from her mama. Most times Wyatt didn't answer, but sometimes, just sometimes, he found himself listening. She'd renamed half his stock, too. The old mule was Sir Cranky, The rooster became Marshall Peck, and Daisy, his late wife's favorite horse, she'd simply renamed Angel. Wyatt pretended to grumble about it, but deep down, every ridiculous name she gave filled the silence with something he'd forgotten. Sound. Life. Still, he kept his distance. Until one morning Sophie slipped and scraped her knee chasing after Angel through the mud. She cried hard, more from fright than pain, and Wyatt found himself kneeling beside her before he could think. "Easy now," he murmured, rinsing the cut with water. "Ain't nothing but a scratch." Her sobs softened. She sniffled, looking up through tear-wet lashes. "Thanks, Pa." Wyatt froze. "What did you call me?" Her eyes went wide, realizing her mistake. I meant Mr. Wyatt." He stood abruptly, backing away as if struck. "Don't call me that, ever." The girl flinched at his tone, clutching her locket. "Sorry." Wyatt's breath came rough and uneven. He turned his back, staring out at the hills where Mary's grave lay hidden among the budding wildflowers. He'd promised himself long ago never to open that door again. Love had cost him too much the first time. That night the house stayed quiet. Sophie went to bed early and Wyatt sat alone at the table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling by his hand. He didn't notice the tears until one splashed on the table. The next day, Sophie crept into his study while he was outside. Dust motes drifted in the sunlight, landing on the only thing that looked well kept, a framed photograph on the mantel. A woman smiling, eyes kind, belly round with child. Sophie traced the edge of the frame with her finger. The woman looked like she belonged to sunlight itself. When Wyatt came back inside, he found her holding it. "Is this your wife?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "Was. She looks like an angel," Sophie whispered. Wyatt's throat closed. "Yeah, she did." Sophie looked up at him, small and certain. "I think she'd be proud you helped me." He swallowed hard. There was no answer to that, only the weight of her words hanging heavy in the quiet. That night, for the first time in years, Wyatt dreamed. But it wasn't of graves or fevered goodbyes. It was laughter echoing across the porch, of two voices, one woman's, one child's, calling his name across a field of gold. He woke before dawn, breath unsteady. For a long time he sat by the window, watching the first light creep over the plains, wondering if Mary would forgive him for caring again. A week later, the calm broke. Wyatt rode into Pine Hollow for supplies, and there he saw a stranger standing by the marshal's office, a man in a weathered coat, lean and hard-eyed. The moment the man spotted Wyatt, he tipped his hat. "You the one keeping that girl?" he asked. Wyatt frowned. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Clint Darrow." "Sophie's uncle." Wyatt's jaw tightened. She never mentioned any uncle. "Didn't expect she would," Darrow said smoothly. "Poor thing's been through a lot. Her daddy, my brother, was a drifter. I've been looking for her since I heard about the wreck." Marshal Tate stepped out behind him, nodding. "He's got papers," Wyatt. "Looks legitimate." But something in the man's eyes, cold, watchful, didn't sit right. Wyatt forced a smile. "You'll forgive me if I don't hand her over just yet. Kid's been through enough." Darrow shrugged. "Take your time. I'll be staying at the saloon till you come around." As the man walked away, Wyatt's gut twisted. He'd spent his life trusting his instincts, and every one of them screamed that this man wasn't family. That night, as Sophie slept curled near the fire, Wyatt sat in the dark, watching the shadows crawl across the walls. Something had changed. The ghost rancher who swore he'd never care again now had something, someone, he couldn't bear to lose. And somewhere in town, a stranger with a fake smile was waiting to take her away. Wyatt didn't sleep much after that night. Every time the wind brushed the cabin walls, he found himself glancing toward the window, half expecting to see that man's silhouette standing by the barn. Sophie didn't know about the uncle. He'd decided to keep it that way, at least until he could sort truth from lies. For now she deserved peace, what little the world still owed her. But peace never lasted long in Pine Hollow. By the third day, Marshal Tate rode out to the ranch again. "That fella Darrow's getting antsy," he said, dismounting. "Claims you're holding his kin against her will." Wyatt crossed his arms. "That so? Look, I'm not saying I believe him," Tate continued carefully. "But he's got documents, a family Bible with her name, old letters. Can't just ignore that." Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "You ever seen a man carrying papers that neat after a blizzard crossing?" "He's lying, Tate. I can smell it." Tate sighed. "You got proof?" "No," Wyatt admitted. "But I got the girl's fear. That's proof enough for me." And that evening, Wyatt decided to test his hunch. He hitched up the wagon, told Sophie they were going to town for molasses and feed. She climbed in cheerfully, swinging her legs, her locket glinting against the fading sun. When they arrived, Wyatt tied the team outside the general store, but instead of going in, he led her down the boardwalk toward the saloon. Through the window, he saw Darrow laughing with two men at a corner table, rough types, dust still clinging to their coats. Eyes sharp and mean. Wyatt felt his stomach turn. "Stay here," he whispered to Sophie. But she followed his gaze through the glass and froze. Her small hand gripped his sleeve like a vice. "Pa," she breathed, voice trembling. He looked down sharply. "What did you call me?" Her eyes never left the window. "That man. He was there. When the wagon fell." Wyatt went cold all over. "You sure?" She nodded. Mama tried to scream. He hit her. The words landed like a gunshot. Wyatt's hands curled into fists, his pulse pounding in his ears. He forced himself to breathe. "All right," he said low. "We're leaving." Quietly. They slipped back to the wagon and headed home by the long trail, avoiding the main road. The sun was gone before they reached the ranch. Inside, Wyatt locked the doors, loaded his rifle, and knelt beside the fire. "You did good, Sophie," he said gently. "You're safe here, you hear?" Her chin quivered. "He's gonna come." Wyatt brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his voice steady but low. "Let him try." The next day, Wyatt rode back into town alone. "Marshall," he said as he entered the office, "that man's no uncle. He's part of the gang that robbed that wagon. My girl saw him." Tate frowned, rubbing his temples. "That's a mighty big claim, Wyatt. You got any evidence besides her say-so?" Wyatt slammed his hat on the desk. "She's 6 years old and terrified. You think she'd lie about seeing the man who killed her mama?" The marshal sighed. "I don't doubt she's scared. But I need something I can hang him on. Without proof, Darrow's walking free." Wyatt's fist clenched. "So you're telling me to sit quiet while he comes sniffing around my ranch?" "I'm telling you not to start a war you can't win," Tate said firmly. "Let me handle it." But Wyatt had seen too many good folks buried under the words, "let me handle it." He tipped his hat and left. For that night, Sophie's laughter, once so steady, was gone. She barely ate, flinching at every sound beyond the window. Wyatt kept the lamps low, curtains drawn, rifle across his knees. When the wind shifted, he smelled tobacco smoke. Fresh, not from his own pipe. They were out there, watching. He loaded the rifle and looked at Sophie. "We'll be fine, little one. You got my word." She nodded, though her eyes shone with tears. "Promise?" Wyatt's voice came rough, steady as iron. "I promise." And for the first time in years, he knew exactly what that meant. He'd promised never to care again. Now, he was ready to fight for it. Storm rolled in just after sundown, dark clouds sweeping across Pine Hollow like an army on the march. Thunder grumbled low over the hills, and with it came a feeling Wyatt hadn't known in years, the certainty that danger was coming. He checked the rifle again, loaded, lanterns doused. Doors barred. Sophie was curled up on the cot, her locket pressed against her chest. "Wyatt," she whispered. "Yeah? Are the bad men coming?" He swallowed, eyes fixed on the window. "Maybe, but they won't get you." "I promise," she nodded, trusting him the way only a child could. Then she whispered something that burned straight through his armor. "I ain't scared if you're here, Pa." He turned away quickly. pretending to check the lock again. The word hit like a bullet, but not one meant to kill. It was soft, small, and it carried something he thought he'd buried for good. Outside, thunder cracked again, and beneath it he heard hooves. Wyatt moved to the window, peered through the rain. 3 riders. No lights, no words, just shadows sliding closer to the barn. He took a slow breath, the kind a man takes before stepping into hell. "Stay low," he told Sophie, "and no matter what happens, you don't make a sound." Her lip trembled, but she nodded. He kissed the top of her head before he could stop himself. "You're my brave girl, you hear?" She clung to his sleeve. "Don't go. I'll be right outside." Wyatt stepped into the storm. Rain slashed sideways as he crossed the yard, boots sinking into the mud. The barn doors creaked open just enough for him to slip inside. He crouched behind the feed barrels, rifle steady, every nerve tight as wire. The first figure appeared, a flash of a slicker, a glint of steel. Then another. They spread out like wolves, checking stalls, whispering low. He caught the voice. "Darrow." "She's here somewhere," the man hissed. "Grab the brat and burn this place down if you have to." Wyatt's pulse steadied. He'd heard enough. When Darrow stepped past the open doorway, Wyatt rose and fired. The shot tore through the dark, thunder answering a heartbeat later. One of the men dropped. Chaos exploded. Bullets slammed into the beams. Horses screamed. Wyatt dove for cover, returned fire, gritting his teeth as splinters flew past his face. Then pain. A white-hot stab through his shoulder. He fell hard, rifle skidding across the dirt. Darrow's boots crunched closer. "Should have stayed dead, ghost man," he sneered. "You can't save her. You couldn't even save your own." Wyatt's blood ran warm down his sleeve. But even through the haze, his gaze found the farmhouse window. A flicker of light. A small shadow watching. Sophie. And somehow that was enough. Wyatt surged forward, tackled Darrow into a stall. The gun went off, grazing his side. They struggled in the straw, fists and fury and rain. Wyatt slammed the man's hand against the post till the revolver dropped, then swung once. Hard. Darrow fell back, cursing, face bleeding. "Marshall's comin'," Wyatt growled. "You're done." "Maybe," Darrow spat, "but you'll be dead first." He lunged. Before Wyatt could react, another sound cut through the storm. A child's voice, high and terrified. "Pa." The distraction was all it took. Darrow turned toward the sound, just as Wyatt snatched the fallen revolver and fired. The shot hit true. The outlaw staggered, eyes wide, then fell into the mud. Wyatt stumbled toward the porch, clutching his shoulder. Sophie burst through the door, tears mixing with the rain. "Don't leave me, Pa," she cried, wrapping her arms around him. The word, "Pa," broke him open completely. The dam he'd built inside for 3 long years finally gave way. He dropped to one knee, pulling her close despite the pain. "I ain't going nowhere," he rasped. Not ever again. Pound of hooves echoed through the dark. The marshal and his men riding hard. Lanterns flared. Shouts filled the yard. Tate jumped off his horse, rifle ready. "Cole, you alive?" Wyatt managed a grim smile. "Mostly." The marshal looked around at the bodies, the smoke, the child clinging to the bleeding rancher. "Lord above," he muttered. "You sure know how to pick a night." Wyatt just held Sophie tighter, his voice rough but steady. "She's safe. That's all that matters." And for the first time in 3 winters, he felt something he'd thought forever gone. Peace. The ghost rancher had become a father. Morning came pale and quiet after the storm. The world washed clean. Smoke still curled from the shattered barn, bullet holes marking the walls like scars of a fight that nearly ended in ghosts. Wyatt sat on the porch, shoulder bandaged, his arm in a sling. Sophie was asleep against him, her little hand still clutching the hem of his coat. Marshal Tate stood at the foot of the steps, hat in hand. "We got the rest of Darrow's gang rounded up," he said. Turns out they'd been using the mountain pass to move stolen goods. Your girl was the only witness left. Wyatt nodded, tired but steady. She's the reason I'm still breathing. Tate gave him a long look. You know, Wyatt, 3 years ago, I wouldn't have bet a nickel you'd care about anyone again. Wyatt's gaze softened on the child beside him. Neither would I. Over the next few days, Pine Hollow buzzed with talk. Folks rode out to the ranch bringing food, mending boards, and even replacing the shattered windows. Some came just to see the ghost rancher who'd taken a bullet defending an orphan. Wyatt bore it with quiet endurance, though every thank you made him shift uneasily, as if kindness was a coat that didn't quite fit anymore. When Sophie woke, the first thing she asked was, "Is it over?" Wyatt brushed her hair back gently. "It's over, sweetheart. You're safe." She looked down at her locket, then back up at him. "Can I stay with you?" He hesitated just long enough for her smile to falter. Then he said it plain and certain. "Yeah, you can stay. If you want to." Her eyes lit up. "Then I choose here." Wyatt's throat went tight. He'd faced gunfire, pain, loneliness, but nothing undone him faster than that tiny, sure voice. A week later, the marshal came by again, carrying papers. Territory judge approved guardianship, Tate said, setting them on the table. "Figured you might as well make it official before she charms someone else into adopting her." Wyatt blinked. "You mean legal?" Tate smirked. "Ain't nothing more legal than a judge's seal. All you gotta do is sign." Wyatt picked up the pen, his hand trembling slightly. The last time he'd signed anything official, it had been Mary's death record. But this was life. He looked at Sophie. "You sure about this, kiddo?" "I ain't exactly easy to live with," she grinned. "I like grumpy people. They're the best huggers," Tate chuckled. "She's got you pegged, Cole." Wyatt smiled faintly and signed his name with a firm stroke. Wyatt Cole, guardian of Sophie May. The marshal took the papers, nodded, and left them to their quiet. Sophie hopped into Wyatt's lap and beamed. "So what does it mean now?" He tilted his head. "Means I gotta make sure you brush your hair, say your prayers, and stay out of trouble." Her nose wrinkled. "That sounds like a pause job." Wyatt paused, then smiled. Soft, sad, and full of something he hadn't let himself feel in years. "Yeah," he said. "Reckon it does." Later that evening, they climbed the ridge behind the house. The sunset bled gold and crimson across the valley, setting the cottonwoods aflame with light. Wyatt stopped by 2 small headstones, Mary and the unborn child they'd never named. Sophie slipped her small hand into his. "Is this where she rests?" He nodded. "Yeah, right here." She crouched down and laid a wildflower between the stones. "Hi, Miss Mary," she whispered. "Thank you for letting him take care of me." Wyatt swallowed hard, eyes burning. He knelt beside her, touching the cool earth. "You'd have liked her," he said quietly. She had a laugh that could wake the sun. Sophie smiled up at him. "I think you got that now." He laughed softly, broken, grateful, alive. As the wind rose over the ridge, Wyatt felt something settle inside him, a peace so deep it almost scared him. He'd spent years living like a shadow, afraid of caring, afraid of loss, but now, with Sophie's hand in his and the sun painting their faces gold, he understood what Mary would have wanted all along, not for him to forget, but to live. By the time they walked back to the house, the lamps inside glowed warm through the dusk. Sophie ran ahead, calling over her shoulder. "Come on, Pa." Wyatt smiled, a full, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. "Right behind you, kiddo," he said, voice steady as the land itself. And for the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel like the ghost rancher anymore. He felt at home. Spring came gently that year, the kind that coaxes green from the dust and laughter from tired souls. The Cole Ranch, once silent as a graveyard, now rang with life again. Morning light spilled through open windows, glinting off tin pails and fresh paint. Sophie's giggles carried from the yard where she chased a hen that had escaped the coop. bare feet kicking up tiny whirlwinds of dust. Wyatt leaned on the porch rail, coffee steaming in his good hand, shoulder healed but still stiff. His eyes softened as he watched her spin, sunlight in her hair and joy in her step. 3 years ago, that sound, laughter, had felt like betrayal. Now it was the sound of living again. Yet inside, the mantel above the hearth had changed. Where once a single photograph of Mary had stood alone, now 2 smaller frames sat beside it, one of Sophie in her new dress, grinning toothless at the camera, and another of her and Wyatt together, both squinting against the sun, awkward but happy. Beneath the photos lay Sophie's locket, polished and whole again, resting on a folded scrap of paper with Wyatt's handwriting. Love ain't measured by blood, but by who stays when the storm hits. By late morning, visitors began to trickle in, neighbors bringing seed, the blacksmith's wife with a pie, even Marshall Tate stopping by to check the fence line, though he mostly just wanted coffee and conversation. Ranch looks good. Cole, the marshal said, taking in the painted barn and new roof shingles. Never thought I'd see you running stock again. Wyatt chuckled. Didn't figure I would either. Guess a fella finds reasons when someone's dependent on him. Sophie peeked around the corner, holding a chick cupped in her palms. Marshall Tate. Look, she hatched. Tate grinned. Well, ain't that something? What did you name her? Sophie thought for a moment, then said proudly, Hope. Wyatt glanced toward the horizon, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. Seems right. That evening they sat around the dinner table. Wyatt, Sophie, and a few friends from town who had helped rebuild the barn. The place glowed with lantern light and easy talk. Sophie chattered about her lessons, proudly reading out loud a line she'd written herself. Home is where someone waits for you at the window. Everyone clapped, and Wyatt felt something swell in his chest that wasn't pain anymore. It was pride, plain and powerful. When the dishes were cleared and the guests rode off into the twilight, Wyatt and Sophie walked out to the corral to say goodnight to the horses. The stars hung heavy above them, bright and close. Sophie leaned against his side, small and warm. Pa, she said softly, do you think Mama's happy where she is? He took a slow breath, looking toward the dark ridge where Mary rested. Yeah, I do. I think she's smiling every time the wind blows through them trees. Sophie smiled sleepily. Then she must be smiling a lot. Wyatt chuckled, resting a hand on her shoulder. Reckon she is. Later, after tucking her into bed, he stepped out onto the porch. The night smelled of sage and rain coming. Crickets sang from the creek bed. He glanced up at the stars. Mary's stars. He used to call them, and felt no ache this time. Only warmth. He'd spent years burying his heart so deep he thought he'd never find it again. But love, stubborn as a weed, had found him first, small, brave, and calling him Pa. Wyatt lowered himself into the porch chair, hat tilted back, the old house creaking softly around him. The lamplight flickered behind the curtains where Sophie slept, and for the first time in forever, he whispered into the dark, Thank you. Not to anyone in particular, to the land, the sky, the memory of a woman who taught him love, and the little girl who taught him how to live it again. When dawn broke over Pine Hollow, it painted the ranch in gold, the fences, the horses, the laughter already bubbling up from inside. Wyatt stepped down the porch steps, boots crunching over the dew, ready for the day's work. Sophie came running after him, braid flying, shouting, Wait for me, Pa. He turned, smiling as she caught up and grabbed his hand. Together, they walked toward the sun, not ghosts anymore, not broken, just family. If Wyatt and Sophie's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more heartfelt Wild West tales of love, loss, and second chances.